Hey, the new Willow series debuted on Disney Plus, so it seemed like the perfect time to go back and look at the original Willow. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your thoughts on Willow and give us some context. Did you grow up watching it? Did you just watch it for the first time recently? Or have you never seen Willow and don't realize its connection to George Lucas? I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Now, if you don't know kind of the backstory about Willow, essentially, it's George Lucas's follow-up to Star Wars. Now, he didn't write it or direct it, but he came up with the story for it. He was shepherding it. He was guiding it. And in the same way that he didn't write the actual script for Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, he didn't direct Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, but he was very heavily involved in the process. That's kind of what is going on here with Willow. And it's a much more straightforward fantasy adventure rather than being space fantasy. But it touches on a lot of the same kinds of ideas while being in the actual swordplay genre with horses and all of that fun stuff. It's directed by Ron Howard. It has a score from James Horner, and Val Kilmer is our Han Solo-esque character in this one. So if you've never seen it before, if you like Star Wars, it's definitely one checking out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get started with the good. And right off the bat, it's just a classic, straightforward adventure with kind of the best production that you could get in the 80s. There were a lot of like lower budget sword and sorcery films in the 80s, but this is one from Lucasfilm after Star Wars, where they had plenty of money to kind of deliver as big and adventurous of a film as you could ask for. And it has all the things you want. Kidnappings, rescues, sword fights, sorcery, horseback chases. All of it is kind of thrown in there to kind of provide all the things in this genre that you want in one accessible package that's not overly long, it's not overly convoluted, it's not overly serious. It's just a fun, straightforward adventure with unlikely heroes saving the day. A big part of the appeal here is there's some great characters in the mix. The standout would be Madmartigan, played by Val Kilmer. He's essentially our Han Solo-esque scoundrel who's not looking to be a hero, but by the end of it becomes the hero. Except in the context of this one, he's the greatest swordsman who's ever lived, but he's introduced as this guy in a cage that's kind of crazy. And then throughout the journey, you get to see him actually use his skill set and all this stuff. And so just a real fun, lively character with a young Val Kilmer bringing all his charisma, all of his energy, and just kind of brings things to life. Then, of course, you have Willow thrown in the mix. And his character has more kind of annoying qualities to him because he can be very whiny at times. But there's also something about this very unassuming person that, by his very nature, doesn't have a lot of the immediate skills that you would think that someone needs for an adventure like this, but chooses to be courageous and chooses to do the right thing continually, despite the tremendous danger that he's putting himself into. Another great thing about this movie is the score from James Horner. James Horner is my second favorite film composer of all time behind the great John Williams. And here you get a great James Horner score. And it's a genre that I think it lends itself to people having really fun scores. Just with this adventurous genre. So you have the heroic theme, you have the romantic theme, you have the villain theme, and all of them stand out, get stuck in your head. And James Horner, being obviously a great film composer, brings his A game to this particular project. Another nice thing in here, and this isn't going to work for everybody, but like if you like 80s effects, you get a bunch of just creepy, gnarly 80s creature effects kind of going on here. That stuff weirds my wife out. So she actually doesn't like this movie because of all the grimy 80isms and stuff like that. But that's kind of some of the appeal to it to me, is just seeing those types of effects again, and kind of the biggest budget version that you could get of them at the time. And, you know, when they're in the castle where with the trolls in it and that big monster that emerges, and it's combining all the different effects that you could do at a time, and there's a certain charm to them. Now, if you're not used to them, if you're younger, they probably will stand out a little bit more to you and frustrate you, but if it's something you kind of grew up with them, there's something appealing about having those old school kind of effects going on. Just other nice things in here is that it just touches on all the classic themes that you want in a story like this. Willow doesn't have faith in himself, but chooses to do the right thing. Madmartigan is a very scoundrelous, like he's not a good person, but that he has good in him, and he finds something to believe in to become the hero that that he had the potential to be. You have our villain's daughter, Sorsa, not really believing in the cause of her mother and seeing these other people so valiantly choosing to fight against all odds for the sake of saving this child moves her to no longer side with her mother who wants to murder a baby. And you just kind of have these classic themes that work really nicely in the genre. It's fast-paced. It's right around that 2-hour mark while having a bunch of action set pieces, big gigantic quest and journey all along the way, a lot of characters. So it just moves at a nice little brisk pace. It's kind of episodic in the way it works, where they go to a different place and have an adventure there, move to the next place, have an adventure there. But it works for the genre where you're on a journey like this. So just a lot of, when you think about the fantasy genre, this is one of the more kind of accessible type stories. Obviously, Lord of the Rings being the ultimate example of accessible fantasy for the whole family. But this would be one of the other ones in there where you have that George Lucas shine, his sensibilities of taking these classic tropes and genres and packaging in them in a way that's fun, exciting for everyone. It's an early film from Ron Howard. He, of course, went on to be one of the great directors of the last 35 years. And you see that in this film of just it delivers the big emotions, excitement that you want from a film like this. There's a few issues in here, too. This is a movie for me that pretty much ever since I first watched it, I've always liked it. I've always thought it was good. But every time I watch it, it's never as good as I want it to be. I always go in expecting it a little bit better, and it comes in a little below my expectations. So let's move on to some of the bad. And the first thing that comes into mind in here is that there's a number of ways in which it follows the Star Wars formula a little bit too close. And some of that's because Star Wars itself was based off all these archetypes, and the exact timeline of when he was influenced by Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, isn't exactly clear, but the concept was always there that he was trying to pull from all of these different classic mythologies and archetypes and tropes and structures and then package it in a fresh new way. But then when you do a more straightforward rendition of fantasy, and you've already done Star Wars, it's so iconic and clear what you're doing, you can see a few too many parallels of like, okay, I see what you're doing here again. And our main villain here, very much a Palpatine-esque villain, except a lady. And then we have our Bone Reaver here, very clearly a new Darth Vader. Madmartigan, very clearly our new Han Solo. So you can just see what they're doing with a number of these just kind of different characters in the mix. And I understand that we're always going to have some of that, but it shouldn't be so obvious that it's just like, right, okay, it's Star Wars, but it's in actual normal fantasy context. And there's differences, and there's a lot of like Moses in here, especially at the beginning of it. There's a bunch of prophecies that are in the prequels, but they weren't in the original trilogy the way that they are prominent here. So it's not straightforward, all of it just Star Wars, but there's several things that are a little bit too obvious. Moving along these same lines, I think the villains are underwritten. And I think it might even be a little bit more of a world building issue, even so more so than the villain themselves. But it's kind of they're kind of left in this nebulous evil trying to take over. Prophecy says Allura will defeat them and stop them, but it kind of it doesn't really flesh some of that out. Like all throughout the movie, we're having the knights show up and like, oh, they defeated us again. And they're just, I've actually watched the movie twice in the last month. I didn't mean to do that, but that's the way the universe played out. And there's just questions of exactly kind of what's going on here. Where are they getting all their troops from? How are they so powerful? That I feel needed to be elaborated on a little bit more to fully understand the threat. Like we get, they keep defeating armies. They're bad. They're going to kill a child to maintain this power. But what's driving some of that, what's going on behind that, I feel could have been fleshed out a little bit. Brownies get a little bit goofy. They're meant to be comedic sidekick characters. They're, in a sense, kind of like our C-3PO R2-D2 of the plucky side, or the goofy sidekicks, that there's a pair of them that go along with the journey with our characters. Kind of fall into that category. Once again, having some of these parallels to Star Wars. They're very different from a couple droids, but in a certain sense, they follow some of the similar, bringing a certain energy, lightness to certain interactions. But they get pretty goofy, even with just their voices and everything that they're doing. Willow himself, he's too whiny. He's just exasperated all the time. And they kind of hit these same notes of like, it's just impatience, frustration, just always hitting the same beat, always the same kind of way with him. And it doesn't develop out of that. So I wish that he wasn't quite so much like that. And the final one on here is it just takes a while to get going. Even rewatching it over the last couple days, the back half has a lot more action than the front half. The front half has like the cart chase, but that's really in the first half the only memorable action sequence. Then as soon as you move into the back half, you get the snow rescue and sword fight there, followed by the sled chase, followed by the castle with the trolls and the monster. Then you get the big finale, and it's like 3 big action set pieces pretty close together in the back half. In the first half, it's kind of like, okay, we do our little Moses rescue the baby, and then we're in the village, and then we kind of quest for a little bit, and there's a little bit of that happens in there to kind of give it some energy, but you don't get the real big set pieces until you're an hour into the movie. And they probably should have balanced that out a little bit more, found some way to get a big set piece in at like the 25-minute mark or something like that to liven it up, something like that. So just in general, a movie that I like the world. I like the idea of it. The score is great. You got some great characters thrown in. But a movie at the same time, never quite as awesome as it seems like it should be on paper. A new idea from George Lucas at the height of his power and influence, and he's got all the money in the world to execute this brand new idea. He gets James Horner to do the score. He gets Ron Howard to direct it. You get a young, up-and-coming Val Kilmer with bringing all the charisma that you want. It's a fun genre. It sounds better than it actually is. Still very good, but I don't think it ever fully lives up to all the potential. And that I feel like has been its legacy from the very beginning. Is that it's like, yeah, it was good. It was good enough. But when you're following up Star Wars, good enough doesn't seem good enough. And at the box office, it did numbers that otherwise would be quite good, but compared to Star Wars, it was disappointing. And that's almost everything about it, that there's a lot to like, there's a lot to love, but unfortunately for Willow, it will always exist in a world where it will be compared to Star Wars, and Star Wars will always be better and more popular. That's unfortunate because just on its own, if it was detached from the Star Wars comparisons, I think it would have an even better reputation. Overall, I give it a B+ on the entertainment scale. Let's go at an 8.5 out of 10. And if you like Star Wars, you absolutely need to check out Willow. You probably will have a good time with it. Over on my main channel, I put out a review of the first 6 episodes of the Willow series. So if you enjoyed the movie Willow, definitely want to check that out to see if the Willow series is good for you. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.